All right, this week we are talking about, was Crowley a sociopath? Sorry for that clickbaity sort of title there. The actual focus of this is going to be why compassion matters in magic, right? And we're going to use Crowley as an example, so he's someone to learn from in this regard, right? I'm sure this video is going to get me into a little bit of trouble for criticizing Crowley, for criticizing chaos magicians, among others like Stephen Skinner, possibly. Those kinds of magic. I'll be talking about them briefly as we talk about the importance of compassion in the initiation process. So first, I'll tell you a little story about a friend of mine. I made a reference to him and to myself as failed initiates, and uh, he took it in a way that was like maybe like a bit of a jab against him, like like I was implying that he was not an initiate, or I was pointing out that he was not a true initiate, or something like that. And I guess maybe I wasn't being very sensitive when I made the comment, but I was basically alluding to the idea of the true initiate being a failed initiate. So if you really know what it means to be an initiate, you have failed. And this is captured in the neophyte secret handshake, when the neophyte secret handshake, which I'm going to tell you now, it's no longer secret, is it? Is you reach for the person's hand and you miss the first time, and then you try again, and then you manage to grab their hand, and that's the secret handshake. Okay, um, it's the secret handshake in a coded form, in a cult initiation type form, because it conveys something very important about what it means to be a true initiate. You have to know what it's like to fail, to fly up to the heavens, to miss the mark and come crashing back to earth, crash and burn, right? So you have to know what that's like in order to be a real initiate. Okay, we'll talk about that in a bit. Uh, I think this image is called "The Fall of Day." It's by William Rimmer. Uh, it was sketched in 1870, so it's in the public domain. So Led Zeppelin can't come after me for using this image, because they took it and changed it a bit and used it as their swan song logo. And it very well depicts what it's like to reach for the heavenly heights, to fail, and to tragically and catastrophically fall back to earth, which is what many Zeppelin songs sound like. So I propose to people that I do consults with, I propose that when they read Aleister Crowley, they read him as an example of a failed initiate, as the perfect example of of a failure in on the magical path, because he exemplifies something that is pretty much key to all the myths about magicians or wizards, and that is hubris, the inability to get past concern for oneself, and selfishness, hubris, pride, pretty much the same kind of pride that caused Lucifer to fall to earth, that kind of pride. And then the magician tends to be guilty of that kind of pride, especially in the medieval Christian sense, because Christianity tends to regard all magic as evil and diabolical, and therefore of the devil. And so the pride, kind of the idea is that if you have the wherewithal or the gumption to assume that you can work the same kind of magic that God can do, that's a major act of hubris. Okay, and the Christians do have a point with that. Okay, but of course, the way that magic is really done, let's say in a Golden Dawn framework, can be done in a method called theurgy, also known as God working, okay, where it's not you usurping the throne of God to basically exert his authority. It's different. Okay, so theurgy, I'm not going to go into that, okay? But so, yes, magicians and witches and sorcerers are endlessly guilty of pride, and they come crashing back down to earth, right? But the interesting thing is that the initiation process really involves that. The initiation process involves ego inflation, and then the bursting of that ego bubble, and then the crashing back down to earth again, and then, wow, something really important happens then, okay? Maybe. If you're capable of experiencing it. And Aleister Crowley is someone who is an example of somebody who was virtually incapable of experiencing something that was crucial to success in the great work. So there's a new way to read Crowley. So I would propose this to you guys too, because if I'm to say that he is a good lesson in failure in self-initiation, then you can read him and look for signs of him being a sociopath or a psychopath or a narcissist. Okay, these are three types of the antisocial personality disorder. All right, um, and the way that he behaved, his notorious behavior, to my mind, it indicates that he was pretty much a classic narcissist. Okay, but all these three, the sociopath, the psychopath, and the narcissist, they share one major theme in common, and that is they lack empathy. They are unable to feel empathy, or they are severely um, deficient in the ability to feel empathy. Okay, it largely results from something called alexithymia, which is a lack of awareness of the full spectrum of emotion. Okay, but somebody with alexithymia can have various emotions happening and erupting through their bodies, but not be aware of it. They might even do things like say, "I am not angry. Why do you keep saying I'm angry?" And they don't even know that they're angry, except maybe for the sound of their voice. It's like, "Oh, I'm yelling. I think I'm angry." So very hard for us to understand when we have a full, range of emotion, a full range of um, the ability to sense emotion, right? Um, it's very hard for us to understand how one cannot be aware that one is angry. Okay, but this is kind of the world that the psychopath lives in. Psychopaths are born that way. Okay, apparently is it brain damage? I'm not so sure. They might have evolved that way. There might be maybe 1 or 2% of the population that is psychopathic, and they tend to have a certain charm to them. All three of these do: the sociopath, the psychopath, and the narcissist. They have a certain charm and charisma to them, and there's a reason for that, which we'll go into. Okay, and Crowley definitely had that charm and charisma, which he still maintains to this day over his many followers. Yeah, and so to fall for Crowley very much is akin to falling for the charm of a narcissist or a psychopath. I think it was Peter Carroll. Peter Carroll, one of the founders of chaos magic in the 70s, referred to Crowley one time that I saw as a sociopath. He kind of thought Crowley was sort of sociopathic. And there is a theory that, pretty cool theory, I don't know, that since Crowley contracted syphilis when he was young in college, um, there wasn't a cure for syphilis, or there wasn't a very good cure for syphilis back then. They really had very dangerous treatments for syphilis, like treating you with mercury and things that were really toxic to the body. Okay, and so there's a theory that since if syphilis, when it's prolonged, can cause brain damage, um, that it and no, it's possible that syphilis can cause pseudopsychopathy, and it can damage the amygdala of the brain and then produce what appears to be a psychopath, where psychopaths are more or less just born that way, but it's possible to be sort of brain damaged also and then lose the ability to feel empathy. Okay, and now when you lose the ability to feel empathy, you start acting in ways that are inexplicable to many people around you. And the ways that you act are very much the way that Crowley acted in his personal and public life. We can go into these things a little bit. So a new way to read Crowley, you can read him for the signs of lack of empathy, okay? But mainly the reason you would do that is to explore why he failed to initiate himself. And so you can recognize the importance of empathy to the ability to achieve initiation or self-initiation, okay? Or the ability to work magic at all, okay? I'm being a bit harsh. It's mainly about initiation here, or about attainment, okay? Clearly, Crowley was a magician. He was able to do magic to some degree, and but we can go into that too, the type of magic that he was doing, maybe in a bit. So when you read him, you can mainly read him for try to find empathy in any of his writing. Okay, and in fact, I have fiction. You can get this book, The Drug and Other Stories. This is the collected fictional works of Aleister Crowley. Pretty cool. By Aleister Crowley. Okay, so you can read his stories. And of course, when you read fiction that's written by someone, you get to see firsthand whether or not they're capable of experiencing empathy, which is so incredibly important to a work of literature. And when it's not there, what does that literature look like? He's a good example of that. And I challenge you to find examples of genuine empathy in his writing. Okay? Not just lip service to empathy and love and brotherly love and all compassion. Not because remember, a psychopath can blend in pretty well and pretend. Okay, so I challenge you to find examples of it. There are some examples, I believe. He wasn't a complete psychopath or he wasn't a complete narcissist. He was apparently capable of feeling some empathy, but that's rather interesting. The way that it came about was very self-involved. We'll talk about that. So lack of empathy is the main thing you can notice as you read anything he's written. Okay. Um, one exception might be book 4. If you read book 4, some of that seems to be genuinely concerned about the audience, actually. But almost everything he has written is very self-obsessed. Of course, this is his autobiography. Funny thing is, this is just a paperback, and I think it's now quite expensive to try to get one of these. So I should take care of this, shouldn't I? And you can open this book to any page and be witness to Crowley's narcissism. Okay, one of the symptoms of narcissism is that when they behave in narcissistic ways, they don't even notice. Probably because they tend to assume that everybody else is this way, and that the rest of us are just pretending not to be. Okay, maybe a narcissist cannot conceive of somebody not being, I don't know, self-promoting or self-obsessed. And yeah, many of us have narcissistic tendencies too. It's quite normal, natural to have some self-concern and all that. Yeah, he nearly constantly aggrandizes himself, and he does it in very clever ways sometimes, where he's not really talking about himself, but you can tell he's talking about himself. Okay. If you count the number of I's and me's and myselfs that appear in his, oh my God, it's just like phenomenal. And it's funny too because he was hyper aware of that. In fact, he was so harsh with his students about their use of the personal pronoun that he even would dictate that each time they catch themselves using I, that they slash their arm with a razor. Yeah, so you can tell he's kind of projecting his own flaw upon his students and punishing them for it, kind of, and it's quite amazing too that the charm of a narcissist would actually have somebody doing that. I'm your teacher. You will slash your arm with a razor every time you catch yourself using the personal pronoun. Oh, okay, right. There's a reason, and there's an interesting reason why they hold such a powerful charisma over their audience. Okay, and you might even look at other narcissists like Donald Trump to see we just can't understand how people can fall for somebody who almost constantly lies and misleads the public. I'll talk about that in a bit. I think I know one of the juiciest bits of the narcissist's charm. Crowley often confuses love with sex. Often gleefully, I think, because he was had a lot of fun, talking about sex because it was so Victorian times, But very often when he discusses love and compassion, it turns into an appreciation of the female body and erotic imagery and stuff like that. It's like, I wonder if there was any real empathy going on, real compassion going on there. Um, Apparently, very little. He was very often bored, which is a sign of somebody extremely intelligent, and also a sign of one of the symptoms of psychopathy, the constant need for distraction. And he had the habit of reading detective novels. Yeah, so like Sherlock Holmes type detective novels. Of course, um, Sherlock Holmes novels, I believe, were being written during the time, well, they were set during the time of Crowley. So yeah, Crowley probably, I don't know, did he even know of those stories? He might have known of one or two. Sir Conan Doyle was alive at the same time as he was. Um, but there were other detective novels also that he was very much into. It's kind of like being fascinated by shallow thriller mystery novels that we have, that like the thriller mystery section in the bookstore, where it's just like, oh, adrenaline pumping action, And of course, the interesting thing about Crowley's love of detective fiction was there was always one super smart guy who is totally in control and knew everything. Very much like Sherlock Holmes detective type, the genius who sees 10 steps ahead of the murderer or something like that. His writing almost always lacks the audience-centered approach, which is a definite sign of lack of empathy or concern for his audience. In fact, his audience, he often excludes his audience. And you get the sense reading his stuff that's like, if you're not intelligent enough to understand these references, then to hell with you. You don't deserve to be in my inner circle. This is part of the charm, actually, believe it or not. His humor comes at other people's expense. Yeah. I found it interesting one time. I had an acquaintance who apparently had strong narcissistic tendencies that I suspected, and she suffered a lot from it too. And um, eventually I was helping her get a book published. And I noticed when she was describing something about humor, she was describing humor as something that we need to learn an important lesson about. She was basically saying we also need to learn that humor is about making fun of ourselves too, not just making fun of others. And I thought that was so striking. And it really said volumes about her and the kinds of things I had observed about her, because, yeah, a lot of her humor seemed to be making fun of other people at their expense. It was, a lot of it was funny. You couldn't help but laugh, but at the same time, it was ouch, And so her lesson was that sometimes you should be able to poke fun at yourself too. But my response to that is that there's so much in life that's hilarious. other than just the folly of other people. So to make humor just about other people's follies, and so you can laugh at them and feel relief that you are not them, that you are superior to them or whatever like that. I thought that was really interesting. And of course, Crowley does this constantly. Many of his characters are thinly veiled references to people that he was detesting and attacking. He was trying to eviscerate people in fiction. He did it to Israel Regardie. He did it to Arthur Edward Waite. He referred to him as Edward Arthwaite. One of his Crowley's characters was Edward Arthwaite. And of course, it was a ridiculous, bombastic, pedantic character. Yeah, he made fun of people in his fiction, and he, of course, talked bad, poorly behind people's backs, things like spread gossip about them, things like that. He was preoccupied with status. He made fun of most of the members of the Golden Dawn as being middle class when he first joined the order, and if you read his short stories, there is an overwhelming um, obsession with power and with perfect love. Perfect love is really telling, okay? Because if you really understand compassion, love is anything but perfect. It's everything that's not perfect. It's a broken thing, right? It's tragic, right? It confuses self-actualization with self-mastery. Okay, there's this idea of it's like confusing um, trying to better yourself. Let's see. There's aspiration or self-improvement. Okay, so I would propose that self-improvement is actually a vice, and then and aspiration is more of a virtue. And then leave it to you to hash that out. Like, what's the difference? Like, they're the same thing, right? So if you are constantly working on yourself as though you're not good enough, that is uh, self-defeating. It's causing lots of problems, and that's usually why we're suffering so much. Like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Okay, and so Crowley suffered a lot from that. I think he was really hard on himself, hard on his students, was extremely disciplined sometimes, um, but in a harsh way because it was like mastery of the self, like riding on top of himself and whipping himself and flagellating himself, like get into shape, be disciplined, do your magical work, concentrate really hard for a very long time, right? Yeah. So self-actualization is quite different. It's much more relaxed. It's a lot of devotion. Um, Concentration is not really all that important. Okay, it is important, but not very important. Baiting students with the inner circle. This is, I'm theorizing, this is part of the charm of a psychopath or of a narcissist, where they always seem to be holding something about themselves back. There's an element of mystery to them that's they never really show you. But that's mainly because that mysterious element that seems to be missing isn't there. Okay, but they can dangle that in front of you like it's like an inner circle. Well, if you really get to know me, then the wonderful things will happen. But I'm going to hold back. I'm not going to show you everything about myself. Maintain my element of mystery. And the real horror of getting to know a psychopath then is to, once you get into that inner circle, you realize there's nothing there. There's no heart. Yeah, this is it's kind of like what Edgar Allan Poe was trying to portray in his stories about psychopaths. It The most horrifying thing in his stories about psychopaths is not being the victim, it's being the psychopath, of not having a soul or not having a heart, right? Yeah. So, and with Crowley, it was like, well, if you really work hard to please me, I'll let you into my inner circle, and then everything from that point on will be golden, and you'll be an initiate. And as many people will discover when they do, you know, the when they studied under him, there was nothing on the other side, just him and him profiting off of you and making fun of you while you weren't around, those kinds of things, right? Was he capable of feats of amazing selflessness? I think Rigardi said he was, and I'm suspicious of that. I have a feeling that he occasionally would um, go out of his way to do amazing acts of kindness, but probably in a way that was to show you how wonderful he was. I suspect. There is one story in this book by Aleister Crowley. I think it's called Only a Dog. It's pretty short. It's called Only a Dog. And he apparently in that story shows compassion for a dog that has been murdered, has been killed. Yeah. Now, it's very interesting, though, that of all the animals that psychopaths tend to like, dogs are it. Mainly because dogs are so unconditionally loving and adoring of you, and you can't do anything wrong, and they're always going to be loyal and loving to you, pretty much, right? Um, it's like, well, so the dog pretty much becomes an extension of the human master. They're so loyal and so devoted to you that just become like a tool for you to use, okay? And you can become quite attached to that. It's like you've lost your own appendage, you know? And so, yeah, but, Hitler himself was noted, well, the ultimate psychopath, right, was noted for loving dogs. And a number of other psychopaths have even been able to cry if their dog died. Yeah. And now, um, how do you think a psychopath or a narcissist would feel about cats? Since cats don't, they kind of act like they don't care about you, right? Um, or they don't really do anything you say. It's like, why do you even own a cat, right? um, and so, of course, now the ability to appreciate cats definitely involves empathy because you just marvel at them. Like, what's it like to be a cat? To be so cool and collected and chill like that. The way that they can relax and be so regal, but you have to have empathy in order to feel and understand that. And of course, there's a story from the Abbey of Thelema where apparently Crowley killed a cat. I think the Abbey of Thelema was pretty much a hovel anyway. It wasn't really. He was living in poverty there anyway. It was a pretty poorly maintained place, overrun with wild cats. And apparently he killed one of those cats, at least one of them, right? And doing a ritual or something like that. I'm bringing this up because psychopaths. One of the symptoms of psychopathy or the signs of psychopathy is that um, killing of animals, especially in childhood. Yeah. That interesting. Another thing to bring up with Crowley is for a while he was a big game hunter, which is another sign of psychopathy. It doesn't mean that if you hunt big game, it doesn't mean you are a psychopath. But of course, it certainly fits the profile. Shooting animals for sport, really, like shooting lions. You're not going to eat them. You're not going to do it. Maybe you're going to take their skin. I don't know, something like that. And of course, and many people would argue that, well, he was a product of his time. Yeah, yeah, I think psychopaths had it better back then. They could kind of blend in pretty well, or, well, narcissists or sociopaths, whatever. How to become a Crowley fanboy, okay? Or maybe, these are warning signs because people really fall under his spell easily. And it's interesting too because his writing can be quite difficult, mainly because he tends to exclude his audience a lot. And the attitude seems to be, if you don't understand this, then to hell with you. In fact, you are banished to the outer circle, right? Because and then he was always dangling that juicy bit of maybe you can come into my inner circle if you finally figure out what I'm saying here. As I throw all these obscure nuggets at you, kind of interesting actually too, because he throws a lot of Golden Dawn stuff out there in his writing without explaining it. And when you know the Golden Dawn stuff that he's putting out there, you can see clearly for yourself the way that he's doing it is pretentious, and it's a way of excluding the audience, of dangling a mystery in front of them and saying you can't have this and I have it, and if I have it and you don't, what does that mean? I'm awesome and you're not. That seems to work on people because they want to be in that awesome inner circle. This is part of the fanboy charm, isn't it? One of the things, so to become a Crowley fanboy, you can claim that initiation isn't necessary. Okay. Now, Crowley did value initiation quite highly because he was a student primarily of the Golden Dawn, and most of what he developed was fueled entirely by the engine of the Golden Dawn. Um, Many of the things that are apparent innovations of his are borrowed from other sources, mainly from the Golden Dawn system of magic. But one of the things, though, that Crowley followers tend to do is they tend to chase after altered states of consciousness in order to do magic. All right, and this includes the uh, magicians like the Chaos magicians and or followers of Stephen Skinner's approach to magic, where they'd say all you need to do is do these rituals. You don't need to be initiated. Just do the magic, and something will happen. Okay. Now, there is something to that, obviously. Yeah. We won't go into that, but what I assert on this channel is that magic is primarily the practice of self-initiation. Whether you do magic to get a certain result, if you're doing magic to get a particular result, you probably are misusing it. Probably. Okay. Magic is primarily used for initiation. And once you get that initiation, magic starts to happen, but you don't have to do anything to make it happen necessarily anymore. Like it's more like you enter a magical lifestyle and the magic just starts happening. You start attracting auspiciousness. Okay. It's not like you're not in control, but it's more of that co-creating thing going on now. Okay, so I shouldn't really get too deep into that. But a lot of the other parts of this channel are about that type of magic, and of course, the type of magic I'm advocating for is theurgy, which is more, I guess, many people would call it white magic. Theurgy can be quite dark, though, as well, but it is not all about me. It's not all about what I want. That's the important thing about theurgy, is just not, it's not my will but thine will, not my will but thine. Okay, and this is something that doesn't sit well with people who want to do magic, because why do we get into magic? Because we want to make things happen magically. In fact, one of the problems with magic is that we engage in magical thinking. And so the magic of initiation magic goes much deeper than magical thinking. Okay. But I'm getting too much off track here, I think. I probably should make a video soon about the problem of magical thinking. in magic. All right. Well, in order to be a Crowley fanboy, you need to be a joiner to begin with. It's like you're looking for a club to join. It's like, well, I'm looking for a temple. I must find a temple to join because I can't do magic unless I'm a member of a temple or something like that, right? Now, that can be important because magic is primarily a system of initiation. But the most interesting thing that I found when I joined Ra Harakti Temple years ago, which is a Golden Dawn temple, um, almost all of my work was done alone. It was mostly self-initiation under the guidance of a teacher, and would occasionally go to meetings, to go to retreats and things like that. And it was done through correspondence. Okay, back before there was email. For a while later, there was email in my training, but yeah, we were doing it before there was email actually. Another thing that would be helpful is to become a Crowley admirer is to disdain the weak, because Crowley eventually came out with the philosophy of Thelema, which is based on the Book of the Law, which ostensibly um, uh, looks down upon weaklings. Yeah. And that can appeal to people who don't like their own weaknesses and don't know it. Okay, or they fall for the whole outward appearance of might is right, that sort of thing, right? So, and that makes Crowley's magic, um, at least, well, ostensibly, it makes his magic appealing. And there's something refreshing about valuing raw power. Again, I understand that. That's definitely something that is overlooked in our, um, it's like in chivalrous attitudes of defending the weak. It's like you don't, but if you are weak and kind and simple, then you're good, right? And if you're strong, you're bad. Nonsense. Okay, but there's a very important element to Golden Dawn magic that Crowley wasn't able to understand or wasn't able to benefit from, and he came out of the Golden Dawn disappointed, because one of the reasons he was disappointed was because, well, all they promised me incredible secrets, and all they gave me was the Hebrew alphabet and stuff I already knew about the Sefirot and the Tree of Life, things like that, right? So he complained about that. And what people who actually do the curriculum discover is that the secret knowledge comes through working with those things in a particular way. Yeah, and that secret knowledge can only be obtained if empathy exists, if you have the ability to experience empathy. If you don't have that, then the magic of the Golden Dawn will not work, and you will not be able to enter the inner order, which is largely a Christian style myth order, mainly because of the dying and resurrected God. A narcissist cannot die and be reborn. It's impossible because they cannot experience enough empathy to do that. In fact, I'm wondering if somebody cannot experience empathy, I don't know what they could do to advance spiritually. I really don't know. I have some weird theories about it, but I don't think they'd be much good anyway. Another thing about, in order to become a Crowley devotee, you have to rail against outward limitations. Probably, you'd be very political minded and say, I hate all of these restrictions on my freedom. I want to be able to do this and that and blah, blah, blah. Do what thou wilt, right? I want to do what I want, right? This is a misunderstanding. Yeah, the external freedoms are important, but the magical work is really about the inner freedom. Okay, so you've got a lot of monsters out there in the world which are restricting our freedoms and things like that. Yes, that's That's a problem. Okay. Um, but these things exist mainly because of the lack of inner freedom. Okay. And so another thing that would make you a good Crowley fanboy is if you are unable to notice the things inside you or the thing inside you that is keeping you bound up, that's keeping you locked up. Okay. In other words, the monster maker inside you that is conjuring up all those evil forces out there that you think are against you. If you are not aware of that inner monster maker, then all you have left to rail against is the outer monsters, the monsters on the outside. Uh, I've talked about that a little bit in regards to the LBRP, and I'll talk about that later in this video to really clench that point for you, hopefully. Another thing that you can do to basically fall under Crowley's spell is to affect confidence. In other words, you achieve confidence that isn't authentic, otherwise known as arrogance. Okay, so if you really want the confidence of a magician or a realized mystic or a Tibetan master, um, you're not going to pretend to have that confidence. Okay, put on airs and honors or whatever that is, right? And so to look at the confidence and the freedom and the status of a legitimate like mystic or whatever like that, so you look at that and then you try and affect that, becomes your affect, right? You try to imitate that, then well, then you're just a pretender. Okay. And that's kind of what Crowley was doing a lot. He was very good at it though, because he was very smart. Okay. One of the reasons he was smart may have been because his amygdala was damaged. I'm theorizing. Because the amygdala, when we get stressed out, tends to shut down our higher brain function. Okay. And so the cool thing about a psychopath is that the amygdala doesn't shut down their intelligence. They can remain highly focused and they have all their reasoning faculties intact, even as uh, you are giving them electric shocks. Okay, they can actually stay pretty focused and keep their intelligence, whereas most of us would get dumbed down very quickly by the stress response. Okay, it's one of the reasons that Crowley, maybe why he was so incredibly intelligent, because his intelligence was never shut down by stress. It's the theory I have. Another thing is you have to adopt the attitude of taking heaven by storm. We can we can force enlightenment to happen, can't we? Yes, right. I love that idea. um, uh, and of course, Crowley would wield that idea sort of just to piss off, the church authorities and things like that, and the established religious norms of his time. But I think to some point he believed it, and if you look at his if you experience some of his magical systems, they have a very powerful punch to them. They're harsh, forceful. Another thing you could do to become a Crowley fan is to confuse pleasure with joy. Okay, that is do what thou wilt, right? I do whatever I want, and now that means I'm enlightened. So and Crowley was a hedonist. Okay, that impulsivity that he had. It's very interesting because one of the things that's notable about somebody with antisocial personality disorder is that they have no remorse, or they don't even really consider the repercussions for the actions that they're taking right now. They don't really consider what damage it's going to do to them themselves later on. Very interesting. That's very liberating too, because then they can do whatever they want, do what thou wilt, right? So, but what it indicates to me is that that Crowley lacked compassion even for himself. Okay. It's not hard to understand that, because when you think of yourself in the future, that's another person over there. And then, but then you imagine how, if I do this one thing now, how is that person in the future going to feel? Oh, I don't want to do this. But so if you don't have empathy, you can't even feel compassion for your future self. And this would explain some of his behavior, like not paying his rent and then being kicked out and then going into a new place, establishing a new lease, not paying the rent, getting kicked out, and over and over again, right? Um, this was possible at that time because there was no internet and no records of people's credit, hardly at all. Of course, you would also confuse love with sex, and then the kind of love that's involved with high magic, let's say, or compassion with high magic, it kind of can easily become debased into sex. Okay, I'm not saying sex is bad in magic, but to not have I don't know, a healthy distinction between love and sex, to realize that pure sex itself is not love. Okay, um, comes with one of those virtues that we pick up in Malkuth called discrimination or discernment, is probably the more modern word for that. And of course, you would learn to laugh at instead of with people. Okay, that might be one thing that you are prone to do. And then, of course, if you join a circle of these Crowley types who are enchanted by his razor sharp wit, then and of course, they seem to enjoy laughing at other people along with him at those people's expense, right? Um, that if that kind of appeals to you, then if you like laughing at people instead of with people, then yeah, you want to join that group because we make fun of everybody else and we feel good because we are better. Okay, this would also tend to show why people who are in white supremacist groups or Satanist groups that advocate for white supremacy and things like that, why Crowley is why these people are also fans of Crowley, because he disdained weakness. Ostensibly, he did anyway, and he was regarded himself as superior, and you had to be special like him in order to understand him. At least that was his kind of the way he comes at you in his writing. You must be special too in order to understand what I'm saying to you. So there is something that is very validating about Crowley's attitude about morality and goodness, and that is, it is really tiresome, especially if you read books on Tibetan Buddhism, how much emphasis they place on being a good person and how much emphasis they place on compassion. It gets really kind of tiresome because if you don't know why compassion is important in magic, it simply becomes a lecture on how to be a good person. And a lot of the Dalai Lama's works come across that way. They go much deeper than that, but he tends to appeal to the let's be a good citizen of the world sort of mentality, right? Which can be very frustrating when you're really after the deeper secrets of magic. So I really understand, and I get exasperated too when people try to make Wicca or ceremonial magic about how to be a good person and how to be a responsible member of this internet community and things like that, right? It can be very annoying because there's something much deeper and much more important about compassion than being a good person, or putting on the airs of being a good person, being a well-behaved citizen. Okay. Now, religion is what developed from magic. Remember, the way back when the king of the city-state killed or banished all the shamans because they were such a nuisance. because they kept trying to empower all the individuals, all the people around them, right? And but what did the king wanted? A bunch of slaves working for him or citizens that were loyal to him, right? So he replaced the shamans with priests, which he appointed, and they acted in very shaman-like ways, but basically their system of magic was now a system of moral control in order to create well-behaved citizens. And so thus we developed religion instead of magic. Okay. And of course, this is one of the things that Crowley railed against, and rightly so, because religion, it's a very time-honored story where the political authorities will usurp the spiritual tradition of a particular land and then convert that system of magic or whatever it is into religion, which is designed to now control the population and get them feeling guilty about being bad people, things like that. So if we're going to restore religion back to magic, well, we try to make things like Thelema, maybe, right? Um, but I don't know, could work still. I think I know a number of Thelemites who are actually, really cool people, and they know that Crowley had serious issues, and they're fine with it. Good manners, another thing, right? So having good manners, especially when one is getting into deep mystical practices, it's really important because they're going to be liberating aspects of yourself that are problematic. And you have to be diplomatic and you have to be able to express yourself and maintain good behavior, I guess, while you're dealing with these difficult issues. Okay, so you have to be able to put on a good face, pretend everything's okay sometimes in order to maintain your silence and secrecy to insulate the inner work that's going on. You have to have these good manners. It's painful to admit that, but yes, it's important to have pretend behaviors so that you can maintain some semblance of decency, even while on the inside you don't feel decent at all for a while. And I guess the point I want to make after this is that this kind of compassion about being a good person and helping others, that misses the point. Okay, it's perfectly fine to feel compassion for others and empathy for others. That's very important, okay? But in the real benefit of compassion in magic is not compassion for others, not primarily. And for the longest time, I never understood what people meant when they said, you can't love others unless you love yourself. Seems like such a silly platitude that I really to this day think that when people say that, they don't know what it means either. Okay. But when you do magic, the magic of initiation and magic of self-transformation, um, this becomes very important. Okay. And it has to do with the true nature of the LBRP, the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram. Okay, so when you do the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram, you're supposedly banishing evil forces out of your life, right? So, and what actually happens though is that those evil forces get pushed out into the periphery of your awareness, where they can where they can become more visible to you, more discernible, more tangible to you. So they actually get worse. They actually get stronger or more noticeable, let's say. They've always been there. They've always been causing havoc in your life, but now you can see them and now you can deal with them, which makes things seem like they're getting worse. Okay, right. So long story short, when you do a banishing ritual like the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram, yes, it does banish negative evil forces from your life, but it pushes them out into an external realm, an imaginary external realm, where you can now experience them and objectify them and see them and talk to them. Yeah. Okay. But when you're doing that, that's the big mistake that we make when we draw the magic circle and we banish the evil forces. The big mistake that we make is that we think the real primary demon that we're dealing with is out there. Okay, that is not the primary demon that needs attention here. Okay, that's the secondary demon. The primary demon that we're dealing with, once again, we draw the magic circle, we banish the evil forces, right? It's a mistake to view the evil forces out there as the problem. Okay, they're still part of the problem. That's fine. The real primary demon is arising in the circle. It's attempting to arise as you in response to that evil, wicked thing out there. Okay? So when something is arising outside the magic circle, it's like, oh, wow, that's really annoying, or that's really scary, or frightening, or I don't think I can handle this trauma image, right? It's just too much for me. Well, the thing that's out here is not really the demon that needs the attention. The demon that needs the attention is what's attempting to arise as you in response to that. It's right here. It's right. It's right here, right? And of course, it's not as hard to deal with, by the way, because it's a wretched little thing. Okay. And in order to handle this thing that's attempting to arise as you and react, you have to have empathy for it. If you don't have compassion and empathy for these things that attempt to take you over and control your behavior, for these things that attempt to rise up in you and possess you, if you don't have empathy for these things, you cannot deal with them properly. I'm sorry. Because what's going to happen is you're going to end up like the evil medieval magician who says, "Oh, demon, I banish thee, I exorcise thee from my soul. Get out of my soul and go back to hell." Okay, well, if you do that, guess what happens? It just gets stronger. It's going to reconstitute and come back even worse. If you need evidence for that, just look at anybody who suffers from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And what do they do to drive the demons away? They drink alcohol, usually, right? And that's very effective. But of course, the demons come back stronger and stronger and stronger because they keep pushing them away. The true response is to feel the horror, the pain, the lust, whatever it is that you can't seem to handle. And of course, that involves empathy. If you cannot do that, the separation between you and the things out there becomes even stronger and worse, which causes ego inflation. Okay, ego inflation is a normal part of the work. All occultists experience it because it's part of how things get puffed up. But the rescuing factor that comes in as that's happening is the empathy and the compassion. It's like, oh, I can see why this thing is attempting to arise and take me over. I can see how it evolved to do what it does. It's an evolutionary mechanism. It wants me to go do this thing. Okay. And so when you see that, you can say, thank you, evil spirit. Thank you, spirit, for sharing that urge with me. Well, I'm not going to let you take me over anymore because I see you now. Okay. But I am going to start speculating as to what your purpose is. How have you arisen to do these things, to compel me to do these things? And as we work together like this, a couple of things can happen. You can dissolve and disappear back into the ether, right? Or you can become one of my pets, one of my familiars. We'll get on good friendly terms. Okay. Now there are many spirits that people have that cannot be dissolved entirely because they're too deeply ingrained within human nature. Okay, so the adept simply makes friends with those. Okay, but a majority of spirits can be dissolved entirely. Yeah, and to never bother you again, ever. It's possible. And for somebody like an adept, a single evocation ceremony can take care of a troublesome spirit forever. Something that's been bothering you all your life can be destroyed. Can be helped to evolve into non-existence through compassion in a single application. It's possible. More than likely, it'll take a few applications. Either that, or you will become on very friendly terms with it. In either case, the suffering goes away. The main task of any magician or any mystic is to eliminate suffering. That's a little bit of a blind that right there, okay? Because the way that we eliminate suffering is to experience that suffering. But when we allow it in, when we allow the painful visions to emerge, it's not really suffering anymore. It's an act of courage, an act of adventure, an act of compassion. And this is the importance of compassion in the work, because these are all broken and damaged things that we're looking at. And the only things in the universe that really require our love and compassion are the broken and the damaged things. And there's a lot that's broken and damaged, because after the Big Bang, a lot of stuff got confused and messed up, right? Apparently. And now the universe is sort of looking at itself through all different kinds of eyes, trying to figure out what the hell happened as we evolve into these various forms, spirit forms or human forms, looking around. Look, this is a great big mess. Everything has exploded. What happened? Oh, okay, let's try to find the unity behind all this again. And in order to do that, in order to experience that unity, that inclusiveness, you need to have compassion and love, great big universe hug, okay? That's very important. And the interesting thing about the narcissist or the sociopath or the psychopath is that they apparently have evolved upwards in their body, like the rest of us have, right? And now they're stuck in their heads. Everything is pretty much in the control tower of the head, okay? And of course, the way back to where we came from is back down, 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 in falling back down into humility. Like basically, you, if you're stuck up, you become like a dickhead, basically, right? You're basically stuck up here now, right? And you can't seem to recognize the humble origins from where you came from, okay? And if you can't experience empathy of the heart, let's say, there's no way back. You're trapped here forever, or at least while you're alive in this body. Can't get out of the head anymore, unless you're destroyed, basically, right? And the way empathy is through the heart back down into the humble origins of our existence, where we came from the universal slime or whatever we evolved from, right? So the gateway between our stuck up position in the head, the gateway between this and the slime that we evolved from, is the heart. And if this is not awake, you're trapped here, like Crowley was, apparently. Very intelligent man. He understood the nuances of magic very well in his head. Was he capable of the initiation of the heart? I haven't seen any evidence of that, other than giving lip service to it. And this is why the Golden Dawn was a disappointment to him, because the inner order of the Golden Dawn is a heart initiation. So when I refer to myself as a failed initiate, there's a bit of a blind there, because the experience of initiation involves reaching up to some great grandiose height, failing to maintain it, and then come crashing back down to earth again. That really is kind of what happens there. And this is why the crucifixion and the sacrificed God are so important to Golden Dawn mythology. That one has to fail and die in order for the true self to emerge. You're trying to aggrandize yourself, and in the process of doing that, you're poofing it up and poofing it up and poofing it up, and then it just falls apart all the pieces come crashing down. You hit rock bottom, and then you look around and you're like, oh, I've been here all along. Another way to portray this is in the grade system. If I go into we start out in the 0 = 0 grade, but then in the first grade of the Golden Dawn, which is the Earth grade, it's 1 = 10. Okay, so the first grade equals number 10, because the first grade of the order is the sphera number 10. So 1 = 10. That simply means the first grade is the 10th sphera of the Tree of Life. Okay, and then of course when you get to the next grade, it's 2 = 9, and then 3 = 8. Okay, but that's a very tricky reference to the fact that as you rise up, you also descend down. Okay, and it's a very subtle reference to the true nature of hierarchy, which is not really like what you see here. The true nature of hierarchy is more like this. Okay, and these are the 4 worlds of Kabbalah. Asiya being the material world, Yetzirah being the astral plane, Beriah being the world of creation. It's hard to understand, a world of pure darkness, and okay, and then an Atziluth, a world of pure light. Okay, so conceivably what happens in the creation of the world is that Atziluth, that's sort of God himself, more or less, right? Atziluth is pure light. The light and the darkness are now commingled, and when they commingle, they form Yetzirah, or that gray area, which is light, white and black combined, right? And then things get even more tangled up and confused in the world of Asiya, where now things can grow. I made that color green. Okay. And so as one evolves, one goes from Asiya to Yetzirah to Beriah to Atziluth. And then in Atziluth, you touch the pure universal ground of being, which is ultimate enlightenment. And then you return back down to Asiya. It's kind of the hero's journey. Okay, the hero starts out very narrow-minded, goes out into the world, experiences all kinds of wide world adventures, has an expansion of consciousness, a broadening of horizons. Wow! And then he goes back home to Asiya and decides to take up a particular task. He's going to take back the lessons of all he's learned and pretty much now apply them to some kind of a task. Okay. Well, it's sort of like the hero goes off and slays the dragon and brings back a magical sword, and now he can use it to do something really important in his home country or something like that, right? And here the idea is that when you get to the highest level and you come crashing back down to earth again, okay? So like, oh, I failed. I can't seem to maintain that, okay? But in your return back to the outer world, what you notice is that Atziluth, Beriah, Yetzirah, and Asiya, they're all one. They're all part of the same thing. Okay, so Atziluth and Beriah, Atziluth bodies forth Beriah, which bodies forth Yetzirah, which bodies forth Asiya. So when you're looking at the things in the outer world, you're actually looking at Atziluthic forces. Okay, though it's hard to recognize them. Okay, but if you've experienced all the different levels of the Tree of Life, suddenly you can look at ordinary things and see the divine light in them. Okay, it doesn't mean you get up to Atziluth and you stay in Atziluth forever and everything's wonderful. It means that you come back into the outer world and you recognize that all of this is that. Okay, so that's what I mean by a failed initiation. It's part of the plan for you to reach those, I don't know, altered states of consciousness. But you come back changed forever. That's the real task. You don't enter an altered state of consciousness so you can cast a spell. That is possible. Okay, you you enter deeper and deeper levels of experience so that you are permanently changed. at least for as long as you're alive in this form. Okay, and so you don't need an altered state of consciousness anymore. You are magic itself, and your whole lifestyle becomes magic. You don't need to enter an altered state of consciousness. That will come anyway. You occasionally will drift in and out anyway. Um, but the most ordinary tasks become filled with enchantment, as they always have been, as they always will be. Okay. The point is to experience the lowest and highest worlds and then come back down again and say, oh, I don't really need to be an absolute. That's already here. Then you can live your life for real this time instead of some kind of fear-driven trauma uh, trauma-infested life, running from one desire to the next or fleeing from one monster one monster after another. Okay, those things go away, and you can actually start living an actual life that's based on deeper knowledge. Okay, and that is accomplished by compassion. If you don't have compassion, empathy, these things are not possible. Maybe one more thing to say about um, the exoteric view of magic is to view magic as something that you keep locked up in your closet, tied up. You don't show it to anybody, but occasionally you go open your closet and you poke at it so that it puts out for you. And you learn how to poke it in just the right way so it gives you the results you want. Then you go away. It's like, oh, I'm satisfied. But then you get dissatisfied, you come back. Let's open the closet again and poke this thing some more to see if I can get some more good stuff out of it. This is the way that most chaos magicians tend to view magic nowadays that I've met. Okay, I know it's not the way that Peter Carroll saw it, and I know that Peter Carroll, the one of the founders of chaos magic, he didn't like what had been done with his idea of chaos magic. Actually, what people were doing with it. Um, it's partially his fault for writing in such a scientistic style, maybe, because science is largely about, poking nature to see what you can get out of it. So the, what I propose here is that the rescue to that mindset is to let magic out of the closet. It's still important to keep things secret for a while, okay, but to respect it. Okay, the universe doesn't take very kindly to being prodded so that it can put out for you. All right, it needs compassion, and what's actually happening in the psyche, like it or not, is much more interesting than you having something to poke to get something out of. Okay, it's much more interesting than that. And if you try to think about that, just doing magic so you can get what you want, that's kind of boring. How long is that excitement going to last, right? All right, well, until next time.